Okay, so far in this series, we've covered what neurons are, what are the support cells, and what are nerves. So let's dive a little bit more into these nerves. The nervous system can be divided into two parts: the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of your brain and spinal column, which makes sense because they're in the center of your body. These guys make the decisions for the body, so they receive information from the sensory neurons and send out orders to the motor neurons. That means that most of the central nervous system is made up of interneurons. So let's start by seeing where the magic happens, in the brain. So the brain has four parts: the brainstem, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, and the cerebrum. And each part has its own distinct job. But they're all made up of neurons in the form of gray and white matter. Gray matter is made up of the cell bodies of interneurons and motor neurons, where the white matter is neurons covered in a myelin sheath, and that connects different parts of the brain together. Remember, myelin allows nerves to conduct more efficiently. In the brain, gray matter can be found on the outside of the cerebrum and the cerebellum, and that's called the cortex, whereas the white matter can be found on the inside. So starting from the bottom, we have the brainstem, which is responsible for a lot of our basic functions of life. The brainstem has three parts: the medulla oblongata, which is responsible for managing our heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate; the pons, which conveys signals to different structures in the brain; and the midbrain, which helps us coordinate our visual and auditory reflexes, like when we jump when we hear a loud noise. So moving towards the back a little bit, we have the cerebellum, which is this big lump on the back of the brain. It's responsible for balance and fine motor control. If you want to stand up straight, walk forward, stop, reach for something, any real movement, you're going to need your cerebellum. People who injure this area often end up with difficulty speaking and walking, and will work with occupational and physiotherapists to start to regain function. Next stop is the diencephalon, which sits just below the midbrain. It has a bunch of structures and is really important in controlling and regulating our senses and emotions, and controlling a lot of other automatic functions in the body. There are two parts that I really want you guys to know about: the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The thalamus helps our body interpret senses and organize them before sending them off to the cerebral cortex. It also plays a big role in memory and emotions, which is likely why certain sensations, like sounds, can cause people to become upset, or certain smells can trigger memories. That brings us to the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the largest portion of the brain. The outer layer is made up of gray matter and is called the cerebral cortex, while the inner layer is mostly white matter. The cerebrum can be broken up into lobes, with each lobe dealing with a different function. But essentially, the cerebrum is what makes us who we are. It's in charge of our emotions, memories, our voluntary movements. It's where our consciousness comes from. So that's the four parts of the brain. And as we take a step back and look at the brain as a unit, you'll notice that it's covered in wrinkles, and that there are two halves, with a large gap in the middle. The wrinkles allow us to have more surface area, which makes more neurons be able to pack closer together. The gap separates our brain into its left and its right hemisphere, and inside the gap is a large tract of white matter called the corpus callosum. This structure allows the two sides to talk to one another, and there's been a lot of interesting case studies on its purpose and what happens when it gets damaged. So we've talked about the central nervous system, what the brain is made of, and the different regions of it. The last thing to talk about is what protects the brain. So there's three layers of tissue surrounding the brain. These three layers extend all the way from the brain down through the spinal column. On the outside, we have the dura mater, which is this thick, fibrous tissue that provides protection and stability for the central nervous system. Below that, we have the arachnoid matter, which is full of fluid that circulates around the brain through the spinal cord. This fluid is called the cerebral spinal fluid. It circulates through the cord and up into areas of your brain called your ventricles. Lastly, we have the pia mater, which is the innermost layer and is full of arteries and veins. All of these layers are called the meninges.